Okay, welcome guys. Thanks very much for coming to this session. First one for the day. Hopefully not too many dusty faces after last night. Everyone looks pretty bright and bushy-tailed. Welcome and thanks for coming. We've got a really full and experienced panel here today, so I'm really looking forward to this session. I think the most value we'll get out of this is if we can dedicate as much time to questions and answers as possible. We've got a huge range of experience here. I'll get all the panelists to do their own introductions in a second, but we've got representation from quality and sustainability managers from the biggest national retailers in Australia, representatives from breweries sort of big and small, and the focus of today's talk, or the focus of today's session, is going to be around the integration of, let's say, sort of beer adjacent products into breweries and the challenges associated with packaging and selling these sorts of products from a quality point of view. Okay, so we know that at the moment, there's a huge increase in non-beer products or beer products that use innovative or new or non-traditional, say, raw materials, brewing techniques, or even packaging technologies, right? And the rate of change seems to be accelerating hugely. There's a huge diversity of new product types, new trends, new raw materials, and it doesn't seem to be abating and letting down. And with those increases in diversity come a whole range of challenges, right, in managing quality as well. And we've got on the panel a number of people who have been through some of these challenges and hopefully are able to share some of their experiences today. So look, I just encourage everyone to ask as many questions as possible. We'll keep this pretty informal and in a Q&A format, and hopefully will be of genuine value to people. I'll just pass over for people to do their own introductions. Maybe we start down your end, Sarah, with you.
Cool. Hi, I'm Sarah and I work at Coles Liquor and I manage the quality team there. So we work with obviously small craft brewers and obviously all up through to wineries and distilleries all throughout Australia and internationally.
I'm Corinna. I'm the CEO and the co-founder of Prancing Pony Brewery. We're Adelaide-based brewery up in the Adelaide Hills, and we started in 2011, and we introduced cider into our portfolio about 5 years ago.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I work at Dog Brewery. I'm the director of operations there. We've got our brewery out in Preston. It's relatively new, and started making seltzer is probably the biggest development we've had about 4 or 5 months ago.
I'm Scott at Bright Brewery. We're at our 15-year anniversary this year, which seems like a long time. We're based in Bright in Victoria's northeast, and we've been progressively experimenting more and more with beers over the last few years. It's been really interesting times.
Hi everyone. My name is Diarmaid. I'm the Group Quality and Sustainability Manager for Endeavour Group. So that's BWS and Dan Murphy's. Do a lot of work with the industry, particularly from a craft independent perspective. Had a couple of experience with different recalls and withdrawals. So I just want to be able to share it with you guys today. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks guys. And Jon Seltin, so I'll just be standing here looking good today, answering no questions at all. So I'm the head brewer at Brick Lane, and lucky to have sort of done business with a lot of these guys over the course of my career, and very glad to have such a emeritus panel. Thank you very much, guys, for coming along. Look, I thought to start things off, we could start with some stories about when integration of these product types doesn't go so smoothly. As brewers, we're all sort of super used to producing beer the traditional way. It's sort of the training and experience of a lot of small brewers to do this, and they do it day in and day out. And occasionally when integrating, say, non-beer products or new ingredients or new techniques into the brewing process, into a brewery, these things can sometimes not always go completely smoothly. And this is why we invited around Corinna and Scott in particular, because they've recently had, by all accounts, really, really well managed recall issues, so it's pretty much the worst thing, one of the worst things that can happen to a brewer in their career. But these are two examples, I think, of breweries who have managed the issue really well. So to start with, I might hand over to you to talk about the origin of your cider issue that you had recently, and we'll start with these two stories and some of the sort of learnings from it before moving on to the others and to open up the floor to questions and answers.
Yeah, so thanks, John, for that. We obviously 5 years ago decided to make a cider. We're in the Adelaide Hills, so we have access to absolutely fantastic apple juice, freshly pressed from a nearby orchard. And we decided that would be a very easy product for us to integrate. As it turns out, it's not such an easy product to integrate. We were quite aware of the complexities before we started, but at the end, you prove yourselves wrong. And to be honest, about a week before we had our product recall, I talked to our head of sales and said, maybe we should do a mock recall just to see that our system works. And I don't know whether I jinxed it, but we ended up with a full-blown recall. So the issues, obviously, that occur is you're dealing with a completely different product. You're dealing with something that comes from the farm, and you're dealing with something that you may not control a number of the processes, whether that be the transport from the orchard to your brewery. So the only things that you can control are internal, like where you store it, how you handle it, and most of all your fermentation, and then of course your packaging. And in our case, it was a really unusual situation in that we had been making cider for 5 years, never had an issue, and I have to say we only pasteurize our cider. We don't add any preservatives to our cider, but we have a dedicated cider tank, and we also have dedicated hoses. So we thought that most of the processes that we had in place were sufficient, but they weren't. And in the end, it really boiled down for us to be very, very diligent, first of all, once we identified that there was a problem and it came from the trade. We had a supplier call us and say, hey guys, we've got a can that I've just taken out of the warehouse and it looks bulging. And because the can was a bit damaged, we thought, well, maybe something got damaged in transport. We didn't immediately think that it was anything serious because we've never had an issue with the cider. We then went into the warehouse. We couldn't find anything left in the warehouse but 6 cartons. That was all that was left, so the rest was all in the trade or with the consumer. And so we thought, well, maybe it was an issue with a damaged can. We couldn't find any signs of spoilage on the products. We couldn't find anything in the product itself. The pH was correct. When we analyzed the alcohol was correct. So, there was nothing initially that suggested that we had a problem. However, we took it quite serious. Even one bulged can, you have to just take serious. So we put immediately a stop onto the product sale, and we looked at where all the product had gone, and we initiated a voluntary product retrieval from the trade. That was the first thing that we did. Then 2 days later, and the issue for us was we had filled the cans in December, and this product issue came up in February, so 2 months later. And long and behold, 2 days later, we got a call from a customer, an end user, saying that one of the cans had exploded in her kitchen. And at that point, I put a complete stop at this issue of product withdrawal, and I initiated, in accordance with our withdrawal plan, a full product recall from trade, contacted our South Australian Hills authorities and FASANZ. So at that point, for us, it was a product recall, and we just had to follow it, because even one exploding can in the hands of a customer can do more harm to your reputation and to your products than anything else. So I might just leave it at that to tell my story and pass it over to you back again, John. Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. Maybe we'll get Scott to talk about his experience as well, and then we can maybe loop back and talk about how this then fed back to, say, your quality management systems and your management of risk around these products. a lot of the focus of what we wanted to do today is probably to focus on the integration of these products themselves rather than the execution of recalls. But the panelists have very generously promised to hang around afterwards as well if there are any questions on that. So I'll hand over to Scott to talk a little bit about the experience that he had as well with the beer.
Sure, thanks, John.
The beer that we're tasting at the moment. Yeah?
Yes, I think most people have got this in their hands at the moment. So we, over the years, we've been progressively making, I guess, more adventurous styles of beer, ones that we've never tried before. So, I think last year was a big year for us with that. With the pandemic, there was a lot more focus on our online ordering customers. I think most of you will have found that online sales were a key part of your business. So we were really focused on having really interesting stuff for people as often as possible. And, that really helped us get busy brewing and all through the pandemic. So, part of that was having our sales and marketing team coming up with, more bizarre flavours and more things to try, for our brewers to have a go at putting out. And, I guess this beer, the pineapple, I can't even remember the whole name of it. It's crazy long name, Pineapple Dream Nitro Cream or something. Milkshake Ale, yep. So, and the nitro is actually only in the can. The keg product, we didn't bother running nitro, but with the cans, we just had a dose of nitro, and that was actually the first one we'd done with that too. So there was quite a few new things in this one. There was the pineapple juice, there was the nitro. We'd done similar styles, but not quite all of those things together before. And I think it was back around February or March that we released it. Within a week, after just over a week, we started getting reports that the cans were rupturing. So they weren't really exploding. I think even though with the nitro, they're quite high-pressured cans, just a little bit of additional fermentation in the can was causing it to just push over what the can could handle. So they were either bulging out or rupturing. But when they'd rupture, they wouldn't actually explode. They were just kind of bursting a little bit and then seeping out. So initially it wasn't a problem, but as it went on, we started to hear of more and more reports. But I think we heard of one issue with it, and then within the next day we heard of 2 or 3 more. And so we immediately put out a product recall. We knew there was an issue going on because that had come from a number of different sources. And it was pretty clear that it was an issue around the warmer storage of the product. So we'd been keeping it refrigerated, but once it went out into bottle shops and sat on a shelf for a week, then that was allowing the contamination to take place and cause that additional fermentation, which was just pushing the pressure over the edge. We did an immediate recall. We contacted all of the stores that the product had gone out to, and we asked them to try and track down their customers and get the product back. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't continuing to be a problem. We also gave all the stores a full refund on all the product that they'd purchased. So, that was one of the best things we could do, because that meant the stores were, if they didn't get products back and had to refund customers, they were still getting a refund on it and they were still making money on it. So, that was probably, even though it meant that we forewent all of that revenue, it was a great gesture to the stores that we found worked really well in our favour. So that's pretty much our story with that.
Yeah, great. What I might move on to is quickly to you, Dermot, to talk perhaps about the rise of these adjacent products, the production of these at small breweries, what you see at a national retailer level around the increased ranging of these products, the wider distribution of them, and the kind of prevalence of issues that you've seen that have either led to perhaps not recalls, because we're probably all aware of those from the notifications that go out, but those smaller, say, in-trade quality management issues. What are you seeing in terms of increases in product diversity out there in the market? And then is that correlated at all with an increase in incidents or with quality management issues in trade?
Thanks, John. So I think we'd probably have to reflect back maybe 3 years ago, 3.5, 4 years ago. This is when when I got into the role of quality manager for the group. Previous to that, I was quality manager for Pinnacle Drinks, which is looking after a lot of the own brand products for Endeavour. There wasn't much happening in that space around secondary fermentation. We then started to see a bit of an upsurge. Got concerned, obviously. I'm a brewer, my background, microbiologist, so I understood what was happening. At that stage, we kind of opened up communications with the brewery, started building relationships with the industry and the brewers just to get the information of what we were seeing back out to the industry so we could start helping. And a lot of the issues were based around, your ciders and your fruit beers. I think some of the new products that are coming in, like the sales, really not seeing many issues there. I think, overall, just from the makeup of the product, they're quite stable. So I think the call out to anybody still is the same I would have said a couple of years back, is around knowing your process, having your positive release process activated, so you're not getting product, you're not making it and shipping it straight out. If you've got concerns that you're not pasteurizing the product, sterile filtering, you got basically a bit of a stopgap that you can use then to ensure that the product is stable. Because all you do need is a wild yeast. Wild yeast. I think a lot of it we found was diastaticus. It was getting in, basically setting off secondary fermentation, and we then saw a couple of recalls a couple of years ago. And it's been, every year we've had a few recalls in this space. Withdrawals were quite up as well for that year. And I think once we got talking about it, we have seen a drop off. So I think the news at the moment is, as much as we're talking about it today and the issues that we've seen recently, I'm not seeing as big an issue as we would have, say, 2.5 years ago. So we've more suppliers on board. We're selling more beers than we ever have. So I think that's a good news story around that the message is getting out there. The IBA have been doing a lot of work as well with their members. So in the last, say, 3 years, the IBA have set up what they've got called a quality pillar. So they've got a couple of pillars around safety and education, etc. But the key one, obviously, that I affiliate to is the quality pillar, and that's really been driving then quality in the industry with the members, and not just with the members. It's quite open and sharing then with even non-members, so non-members can actually get access to that information. So I think, long story short, really, it's not something we can say the war is won. I think you got to be on your toes with these things. I think once we get a bit, once we kind of forget about what's happened in the past will repeat itself. I think the future is really the beers that consumers want, and these beers that we're drinking in the ciders, consumers want them, okay? So I think you got to recognize that there are a certain level of risks with making these products, and it's just then working with your processes to ensure that the product's as stable as it possibly can. And if it isn't, having that gap in your release to market, that if things then are not the way they should be, that you get that signal then from your testing that that product shouldn't be released. Thank you.
Great. Just to round it out, I might go to you, Sarah, to perhaps talk about some of the ways that you've worked with your partners as well to help improve, say, quality management systems, or help manage risk around these product types as well on your side of the sort of the retail landscape.
Yeah, so we've launched a local campaign. So we've gone out to a lot of smaller suppliers and started doing cluster ranging across Australia, which means we've actually increased the number of craft brewers we have now selling through to retail. And we see that as a direct increase to mainly labelling. The biggest QA risk that we see is around labelling. And that actually often comes from that lifestyle claim element as well. So you've got the two elements there. One is understanding the complexity of the Food Standards Code, which it isn't drafted for anyone to pick up and be able to interpret easily. And there's a lot of stuff on there that is very, very black and white, but people don't know that because it's very hard to actually integrate into your normal ways of working. And then coupled with that, seltzers tend to make claims. So seltzers tend to say lower calories or all of these, which are really high risk to businesses. And if you're commonly making a beer that is high in alcohol, high in carbohydrates, you're not even looking at that level of detail. So it's about getting laboratory tests, getting those claims really looked at by someone independent, so then you're actually getting the right data out there. A really interesting one we did was an alcoholic kombucha, which was very early to market, and there was the idea that obviously there's micro in there because the SCOBY was there to create the kombucha in the first place. Obviously, as soon as you put that into a can, you've got less headspace. Therefore, you actually have less ability for the microbes to actually multiply, and therefore the cans will very much explode. And that was very alarming when that was happening to the supplier, who was very, very small, and we were there and we helped them do an audit. And that was actually them choosing the wrong production site. And I think that's something that is in the hands of the small brewers to say, do you know the risk that you're putting on your products to go out to sites that don't really know what they're doing? And they might not know how to do a kombucha compared to doing a beer. And I think it's that understanding to say, do you actually ask these third-party canners or bottlers to conduct forced age testing? Forced age testing is something that will prevent a lot of these issues because it subjects it to the temperatures of, not saying a mean thing about Coles, but we don't have cold chain network in liquor. We have ambient storage, which means our trucks are warm, our sheds are warm, and hopefully our stores are air conditioned in most cases. But that means that your amazing craft beer product isn't having the right level of control that you would put on it yourselves. So forced age testing, I think, is the number one key thing that brewers can control and ask for. If you're managing your own canning line, it's making sure you've got a robust labelling manifest before anything's ever released, because 80% of every withdrawal I have to manage is always a label. So, and we don't really have allergens in beer, so it's also that allergen cross transfer. Does the product you're now producing have an allergen in it? Beer doesn't have to declare sulfites, but if you're putting DMDC in your cider product because you don't want to pasteurize, then you have to now claim for the sulfites claim. So it's about making sure that that whole idea of HACCP, that whole hazard analysis, is really being ingrained in any newness that you're integrating.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And a great segue probably into you, Kev. Just before we go, Moondogs, to much fanfare, released a really successful, excellent seltzer over the past few months, as you mentioned. Although the product may be, as you say, Dermot, intrinsically maybe more stable than something with, say, a lot of yeast fermentable extract left in it, like a cider or a fruit beer. Perhaps it'd be great for people to hear about the changes to your quality management systems before introducing a product like this, and perhaps to even touch on Sarah's point around labelling and labelling compliance here. We know that seltzer occupies a pretty grey space, right? Both in terms of Fazance and also sometimes in terms of the ATO legislation around product categorisation as well. Without giving away the ghost about how you make the stuff, how did you go about managing some of these risks before you integrated this product into your new site?
Yeah, thanks, John. So I guess what's really important when you're integrating a new product or any new thing you're doing is that your process is good. So the way we do it at Moondog is we start by mapping out how we will make the process, and really, if you've got a HACCP plan and you've got your HACCP flow diagrams, that's the best place to start. So you're mapping out exactly what you're doing at each point and what your inputs and outputs are. And then you can do a quality risk assessment. So you can do both food safety and quality risk assessments on each of your inputs and process stages. So that forces you to then go and look at what, the C of A's for all of your raw materials to make sure that you can trust them and you can validate that they're okay. And if there are any risks that you pick up, then you can identify what sort of controls you need to put in place to manage that. Look, thankfully, seltzer's pretty straightforward to make and it is quite stable because it ferments out very dry, and the flavours that we use are stable as well. Probably the thing that you find, you map all this out and then you start making it, and then you realise there are some things that you haven't anticipated. So some hot tips for anyone out there who are using flavours, whether it be for a seltzer or a beer, they can really screw up your ABV testing. So that can really throw a curveball out there. So then you have to go and revisit your quality plan and say, all right, well, how are we going to manage that? So if I can't trust the ABV measurement after I've added the flavour, then what can we do? So then it's about just changing the way your quality analysis plan is, and adding some extra steps to validate that nothing has changed. Pre and post flavour dosing is probably the biggest thing we found, which is a bit of a curveball for seltzer. And then also the way you process that product is a lot different to beer, in that you're trying to make it as clear as possible. That involves extra steps of filtration. And so just validating those as well, and the way, and people do it different ways. It's mainly carbon filtration. You can use lenticular filters that have carbon in them, or you can add exogenous carbon into your fermenter. But whatever you choose to do, you really just need to make sure that you've got a process to make sure that all comes back out. And that can be, I mean, it's not complicated, but it's just really important to map your process out and think through how are you going to validate that you have made the product that you're aiming to do, I think. I don't actually have much to add on the labelling side of things. We do get our products tested, every new product, because we've just released another 4 flavours. So we do validate the nutritional claims that we have using a NADA accredited lab. So we do that externally, just to make sure that what we're saying is true. And you have to be really well planned out for that, because it takes some time. Your artwork obviously needs to be sorted out well before your product is ready to hit market. So map that time in to your process, because otherwise you'll be chasing your tail, and you don't want to be in a position where you have to fudge the numbers.
Kevin, have you had any challenges around allergen management with this product? Are there any allergen claims or gluten-free claims on your seltzer?
No, we don't make any claims like that. We're certainly exploring the gluten-free. So we're working with the, I can't remember who it's called, but that's something we are looking to do. But the speed that we wanted to get to market with was prohibitive to get that done first. So certainly something we're looking at, but yeah, we don't make any other claims. All of the products we add to the material don't need any allergen claims on it.
Yeah, great. Look, we're about halfway through our time, and I promised to dedicate as much time to questions as possible. So we've got a lot of, as you can see, a big diversity of experience and of product types here on the panel, and I'd like to open it to the floor for questions to see if anyone has any specific questions or areas of focus for any of the panelists here. I'll repeat them just for the recording as well after anyone's here. Okay, so the question was, in terms of allergen management, lactose has been used more and more in some of these products than it has been in the past. How's that being managed in the market and in your various facilities? Sarah?
I'll jump in for that one. So we actually worked on a product together with John on actually labelling it. So may contain traces of milk, or milk products were used. So we actually steal that one from wine. So wine have the AGWA, which is an Australian guideline, and I actually use that as traces may remain, and it's an approved term. The issue we have in beer is beer doesn't have the same representation that AGWA represents to the wine industry. So it's really understanding what shared knowledge can we take from their industry experience. And we actually had this discussion quite intensely, and we both agreed that if we're using lactose is actually the allergenic compound that people react to. So if you're adding that to it, that's actually what you need to talk about. So I think milk is too vague. And I think when you're looking at allergen management within your own brands, It's saying, what would someone respond to? We actually have made other things around nut claims when we've made gins erring on the side of caution, because we didn't have the testing to prove it wasn't in there. So that's another element at your angle, is actually find a lab that says it's definitely not in there. And that's how wineries who use milk or use egg don't have to put those claims on there, because they get that testing done. It's more timely and it's more costly, but it means they don't have a claim.
Just to add to Sarah's answer, we had an interesting one as well in managing lactose in our brewery, and not so much from a Fazance or food safety perspective as it was around consumer preferences, particularly around vegans and vegan choices around selecting their products, and it's pretty much the only sort of animal-derived product we use in our process, and for any product that we tend to do, apart from the Fazance implications and apart from the sort of the regulatory requirements, we also consider consumer, I guess, truth in advertising here, and consumer, informing the consumer about exactly what they're going, what's in their product, so that they can make those choices, or they can understand if there's animal products in there or not, even though that's a little aside from any sort of Fazance requirement.
I'll just quickly jump in. I think we both are doing that in both of our products now. We're actually going out and putting vegan claims on our beers where it wasn't something that we did before. That's what we're doing as well, and I read an article that you guys are doing it too.
I think, going back, 20 years, I think it's a good point to make, because, looking back at craft beer 20 years ago, nobody knew about what isinglass was and the fact that it was a fish bladder. And then, you'd vegans consuming beer and going, yeah, this is a great beer. And it's getting that, I think, to your point, there's so many reasons the labeling has to be right, both for safety, both for personal choices people make, just on your nutritional values, etc. So I think I'd make a comment that there's a great resource with the IBA, the labeling guide. So I think a lot of the issues Sarah's mentioned, this is it's a key tool to actually resolving and making sure your products fit for market, not just from a products perspective, but also from a labeling, packaging perspective. Yeah.
I might add something to that. We make a product under license for a brewery in the UK, Purity. We make their session IPA, and over in the UK, they're labelled their product gluten-free, because their detectability for gluten in the UK is quite different to what it is in Australia. In Australia, it has to be absolutely 0%. So we had to actually change the label and label it may contain some gluten. So, and again, we label our products as vegan friendly, because I think it is an important part to let the consumer know what they're actually getting in their beer. And you too often find that we do play a role in the education piece, and that can only come from the label.
Any other questions for the panel? Got plenty of time here. Yes. So the question, just for the recording, was considering the prevalence of different fruit products in beer, is there a particular type of fruit or fruit product which has been noted to cause more recall issues or withdrawal issues in beer?
Just from my experience, it's probably more the category that came up with it, cider, apple, but I can't say it's related to just being the apple and the other fruit beers that we had recalls with. But that's just to answer the question, yeah.
Yeah, so on the cider issue, the issue there is that for most ciders that you have residual sugars left, and so if you have any yeast contamination, then of course it's going to be fantastic when you have some sugars left in the product. So, and I think when you're looking at fruit beers, you're dealing perhaps with some residual sugars, but more often than not, you may deal with fruit concentrate or with fruit flavorings, which may not introduce those residual sugars.
Just another add to the cider discussion. one of the things that I found in a previous role where we were making cider from fresh pressed apples, back to your point, where you're not controlling the process of the growing of the apples, what we were finding is we were getting micro failures. And what it come back to was that a lot of farmers are using a bacillus type bacteria to fix nitrogen in the soil, right? So that comes through as a failure, and it's a spore-forming organism, so it's resistant to pasteurization. So it became very difficult to have your positive release methods to the point where you'd have to, if it did fail, you'd have to put all your product on hold in the warehouse and then get it cultured and genotyped to know what it was, and it wasn't going to cause any issues. And that goes back to, you just don't have control over what the farmer is doing. And you can have the best processes in the world, but you're not going to kill a spore former. Yeah, so really tricky.
We suspected that, but it wasn't that.
Well, the good thing about those bacteria is that they're perfectly harmless. They won't thrive in an environment of low pH and alcohol. However, they still come back and they kind of just ruin your positive release process. And you have to go and dig and spend a lot of money and waste a lot of time to validate it. But, you know, that's what you have your process for, and you need to follow through.
I think also as well with cider versus beer, the acidity. There's a massive amount of acidity that exists in cider. And we actually had the classic example of melting pallets. So what happened was we actually double line all of our Visi cans now. So it's something I would, if you're transitioning and doing something that's totally different in that acidity pH level, we have double line cans because if one point of that can was weak and missed the lining, the acidity it trapped it and it went through. And then when it goes through, the outside isn't lined. So then it eats the whole can, and the whole can leaks on another can, and then the whole can melts. And I was having lots and lots of distress calls from our warehouse going, why are your pallets melting? And everyone was telling, yeah. So it was one can on one pallet, and it meant the whole pallet was just corrupted. So, and that was just something we didn't even know about. So now Visi have specific cans that are double lined.
I was going to say that's using Kevin's methodology, a sort of taking a HACCP approach, I guess, or a sort of a structured problem-solving approach to integrating new products. That's one that came up for us recently as well, actually. You know, we were looking at can liner materials and corrosivity testing of cans against a new type of product that we were integrating as well. I mean, this is table stakes. The can suppliers do this regularly for lots of different product types. Every can supplier does this. Typically, brewers don't worry about it too much, and it's something that we're not that used to, but certainly CSD manufacturers, cider manufacturers, RTD manufacturers are far more au fait with this. And for our learning was certainly that it wasn't a difficult thing to do, and it was good that we sort of preempted doing it, but it certainly affected the project timeline, because these things you can't get an answer on straight away. They take time to conduct, and if there's a customer commitment or a hard deadline for something, it can certainly affect that.
Yeah, Sarah, we had a similar issue. We were importing from Europe, and we were just getting container loads. Yeah, I like the term melting.
Well, everyone was going, can we drink it? Like, they were all scared they couldn't drink it.
Oh, God, and that was shocking. God. I haven't thought about it in a long time, and there's a reason for it.
I'll take the liberty to ask one quickly, if that's all right, maybe to you, Corinna. In light of your experience with this recall, how did you circle back then and modify some of your quality management systems to ensure that these things didn't happen again? It sounds like the recall itself was incredibly well managed, very professional, and very quick and relatively painless. So congratulations on that. But how did you then go about modifying the process to begin with to avoid this ever happening again?
Yeah, so I'm lucky I'm trained in science, so deductive reasoning is just what I do. So we immediately went back to the product after we isolated it, and we had immediately looked at every single step. We had our suspicions of what it could have been, and we immediately sent samples out to the Weight Institute, which is just around the corner from where we live. And it's a wine research institute, so they can do a whole stack of tests. And having studied 4 years of microbiology, I sort of knew what to look for and asked them to do sterility tests. Interestingly, the first test that came back was to say no wild yeast, no bacillus, lactobacillus contamination, no bacterial contamination at all. So it really, really puzzled us what was going on. And then we looked at, because we also filled up some kegs, we tested the kegs, and once we realized that the kegs were all clean and we didn't have an increased number of microbial contamination per se, we then knew that it had to be passed somewhere along the canning line, somewhere it had to be. What really puzzled us that we did actually have to go to all the way to transposon identification, to genetic identification of the organism that caused it, for us to understand what was going on. And it was actually a modified beer yeast that caused this particular issue. So we realized that it had to be an issue somewhere on the packaging line. And then we identified all the mission critical points that we have in our cleaning procedures, and we examined them again. We asked our people to show us how they're cleaning those particular spots. And in the end, we found one spot where the lid goes on the canning line that wasn't as thoroughly looked after than what it should have. And it was the tiniest spot, and that then explained the whole scenario, because in our case, we found we would have one faulty can in a carton. So it was a very, very, very low yeast contamination, beer yeast contamination, but it must have been gone on for a while, because otherwise it wouldn't have happened in that sort of scenario. It wouldn't have mattered to the beer because you don't have any residual sugars in beer, so that explained why we only saw it in the cider and not in anything else. But, you know, it was the tiniest spot, really, that you easily overlook. And, of course, we changed our complete cleaning and hygiene procedure accordingly. And we now also do a validation study of our entire QC and QA system, just to make sure that we don't have something like that happening again. And even though, John, we managed it really well and it was over in 2 days, but you just don't want to do that because it's financially a big issue, and, you know, it's also a trust issue on yourselves. You know, I don't want to call it embarrassing. It wasn't embarrassing. It was absolutely the right thing to do. But, and it shows that you're a mature company and that you're a professional company when you actually take that step. But I wouldn't ever suggest that anybody just goes out and just ignores it and, oh, it's just one can. You know, you've got to take it serious. And we took it serious because I think it will give us more credit and validation with our suppliers in the end if you do something like that.
Just before I open it, oh, here's another one there. Yeah, great. So question was just around the integrity testing or validation of best before dates, particularly for seasonal products, which may not be produced throughout the year, and it might not be feasible to do traditional, say, end of shelf life testing on these products. Keen for perspectives from the retailers and from the brewers on this.
I'll be quick, but that comes back to the question of forced age testing. And I know you've got, you know, a million ideas of what you want to make, but, you know, 1 month is 1 day in that testing. So that gives you that insight. Also considering, you know, we don't have cold chain transport or cold chain storage, thinking is 12 months on a normal beer, taking it to 6 months on a short life, we accept that to our warehouses. So it's also thinking, are you direct to store? Are you to warehousing? and what's the complexity there. So I don't think four-stage testing is always necessary if you're able to reduce the best before date, because that actually is commonplace knowledge. But considering you're not able to control transport, then that's where you would want that four-stage testing, because best before dates predominantly ensure quality, whereas four-stage testing does both quality and safety.
Yeah, I think, yes, Sarah's absolutely right. I think you've also got to recognise that you're not, unless you're creating a brand new style of product that's never existed before, you do have, I suppose, historical evidence on the style of beer. So you look at that too. You know, if you're building an imperial stout, I think you've got, historical evidence to tell you how long they can live for and be consumed, a year, 2 years after they've been packaged. And if it's one of these amazing fruit sour beers that have, a lot of crazy things have happened with, maybe, you got to reduce the shelf life, and that's based on the concerns we've seen with similar products. But I think the forced aging, really, if you have the ability to do it, it'll give you some really good, I suppose, some sound position to be from. But sometimes you'd have to package it, send it off. Maybe you're only going to do one pack run, so it really depends. And to Sarah's point around the 6 months, we'll take product in at 6 months, even lower, depending if it is direct to store delivery. It's really about ensuring we know when to stop selling it, and when customer, if they do consume it, they're just going to have a really good product.
Just add legibility as well, making sure people can read the best before date. And the best thing you can do is put best before date on, even if you think it's more than 2 years, because we actually rotate stock based on best before. If it doesn't have a best before, it gets lost in our stores. And that's the biggest issue for your brand. So put a best before date on it, make sure it's really easy to read, and it will always be rotated. Yeah,
because to that point, sometimes when we do challenge suppliers on that, they'll go, oh yeah, it can go beyond 2 years, and they'll quote the food code to you. But again, that's great. That's the legal requirement. But we're not legally led. We do stay within the law, but our whole focus is customer. People come to our stores for a product experience. You give them the good service experience, the nice point of sale, but they really come for good quality, safe product. So that's what we're about. So if you've got a product that, maybe lasts 3 years, tell us when we should stop selling it, because if it doesn't have the date on it, it does get lost. Big network stores are, they're trained to look for date codes and then act accordingly when the date's gone. But if there's no date code on it, there's the risk that it will stay there. And it's your brand, your reputation. It's our reputation too, because we're selling it. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure customers have great tasting beer whenever they go in and pick it off the shelf.
Any other questions from the audience here? Sam. So the question was around. Oh.
You on the spot. He's in the pillar.
I'm not answering questions. I'm asking the questions here. Okay.
So what's the question? What are they focusing on? So I can't answer for the IBA because I'm not a member.
I may be able to answer that.
Thanks, Corinna.
Okay, so first of all, there is tremendous value, in particular when you're starting up, to become a member, because you will have access to information that you wouldn't otherwise have. So I make that really blatant plug for the IBA, because I think when we started up our brewery, the first thing that we did is actually become a member of what was then called SIBA. And we just, one of a sudden, had access to labeling information, to program information and access to the names of brewers that we could ring up and ask. So it is our industry representation, and it's really important to be a member because you just have access to everything. There's podcasts on all sorts of items on safety, on technical stuff, on educational elements. So it is a very good resource to actually join up with the IBA and get access to that information. So focus always has to be quality, training and safety, I think, and they don't come in any particular order. They're all really, really important. And I hope that answers your question.
And they represent you. When we were at discussions around the pregnancy warning label, they were there, the biggest voice in the room, talking about probably not doing it in colour and probably not doing it so big. But sadly, we didn't win that battle. And they are your voice. So if you are a member of them, and if you're a small brewer, I would definitely recommend it. And I've also reviewed their labelling guides, and they're actually really good. So,
to reiterate, I guess, one of your points, Sarah, one of the biggest challenges we've had in integration in our brewery of some of these products has always been around labelling and labelling compliance. And one of the things that was highlighted early on was echoing what Kev said as well around, say, quality assurance around, say, a lot of our actual physical and chemical testing as well. So I'll take my opportunity to do a shameless plug for BERA as well, for the Interlaboratory Proficiency Scheme that was set up by a whole bunch of industry people a good, 4 years ago now, I think, 3 or 4 years ago now. It's got good membership now. I think all the largest sort of independent brewers are members of this scheme now. And before this happened, you know, a lot of breweries would have excellent internal, say, quality assurance measures around their lab testing. They'd do calibrations, they'd use check samples, they do operator training, but there was perhaps no great way of measuring a lab's proficiency in certain analytes against their peers, right? And particularly for those ones that are really important from a regulatory point of view, like ABV testing. This is something that's important. It's a real cornerstone, right, of quality assurance. And what the BERA scheme does is it allows labs to measure their proficiency, statistically measure their proficiency at ABV testing, for example, against their peers for next to no money in comparison to, say, BAPS or MAPS, you know, the big international proficiency testing schemes. So, I mean, certainly it helped us. You know, it's... others have aired their dirty laundry, so it's my turn as well. We were an outlier for a couple of these analytes at the start of when BERA started up. So we found that we had a systematic error in the way that we measured bitterness in our beer. I mean, thankfully it wasn't a sort of a compliance-related thing, but we were completely blind to this because it was a systematic error. We were measuring it wrong the same way every time. And we were over that 2 standard deviations away from what it should have been, right? And it was a very, very simple thing to do with the caps in the tubes that we use to do this this solvent extraction for the way we measure bitterness in our brewery. And we would have been blind to this because even though we calibrated the machines, even though we used reference standards for this, because of the systematic nature of the error in our process, it was only when we started participating in a ring, you know, an interlab scheme, a ring scheme like BERA, that we actually highlighted the problem. And already we've noticed, since setting the scheme up and since running it, we've noticed an improvement in proficiency, particularly in those really critical ones, you know, like ABV, where it really matters, and if you get it wrong, it can lead to a recall. Any other questions from anyone in the audience? Any other final comments from anyone on the panel? We'll stick around after this if anyone wants to have any one-on-one discussions at all, but
I just want to say one thing just around some of the FSANS changes that are pending and are in discussion at the moment. There is a really big one on nutritional information panelling, and that becoming mandatory on packaging. So I think keep your ear out if you've got anyone who you talk to in terms of councils or anything like that. It's that obviously alcohol is food. It's fun that it's food, but we're obviously exempt from a lot of that labelling that food has to have. It's very complex to ask breweries who are producing one pallet of product to put a whole nutritional information panel on that and expect that to be correct when you've only brewed it once. So that's the information that we're communicating. We're communicating that to protect the smaller brewer because it's something that obviously bigger suppliers can do quite easily, but it's not something that smaller suppliers can do. So have a look on the website, have a look up Fazance, please look at it and see if you guys can put your voice to it because the information we're being provided suggests that it's a very small amount of people who want a nutritional information panel, and at the moment you only need to put one on if you make a high-level claim. So it's kind of a chicken and egg. Does it need to be there? We're saying it doesn't. Have a look into it and try and get your voice heard.
My passing comment is going to be very simple. Don't assume, get it tested. So, because assumptions can just be so wrong.
Any final comments from you, Kev or Scott?
Keep drinking good beer.
Yeah, I'd keep drinking good beer.
So, well, just to say thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I think the value of really getting this message out to the industry and to the brewers is critical to ensuring, at the end of the day, it is all about the customer. I think some breweries I talk to, they get a bit concerned if we're going to pull stock. And, we do work in engaging the breweries that when we got to pull, withdraw, or we won't recall, but we will make a call to withdraw. That it is not around the decision resting with them on whether that product gets taken off shelf or not. It is around the decision we have to make is consumer based. We get some suppliers that are concerned because there's an ownership or to the brand, etc. That they feel that there is a level of comfort that they're willing to take with the issue at hand. I've had over pasteurized beer, and the brewer telling me, "Yeah, continue to sell it. We're comfortable. We'll take the complaints, and we're happy with that." I think we're in it together. It's a river flowing downstream, and whatever happens upstream will come down and hit us at the mouth of the river. So we really need to ensure that customers is the number one focus. So both for safety, both for quality. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd back that up. Best thing we did was to come out straight away and be honest with the mistake that we'd made and wear that. And I think even though I'd prefer that we never had to do it, in the end we had a pretty positive experience from having to do a recall in that way.
Sorry. Your quality system doesn't have to be a static thing. It shouldn't be. Make sure that you're constantly reviewing it, and on the back of the learnings you find, modify it and update it. It's not a one and done thing. It should continually evolve with your new products.
Great. Well, I'll ask everyone to join me in thanking the panelists, and like I said, we'll stick around for the next 10 or so minutes for any one-on-one questions as well. Thanks very much, guys.